I thought the Seeds of Evil title was over the top. But I then realized it was a film hopefully to appeal to a mass audience and make billions and millions, and so I said fine. If they thought that was a better title, then go with it. I still didn't like it. The story behind the story is I was in New York at that point. I was working in an advertising agency, and I was a producer and making lots and lots of commercials that everybody was seeing across the country. If you were in New York at that time, and I was very young and starting out as a young producer, you wrote scripts just because you wrote scripts. Everybody had a script that they wanted to do and make into a movie in New York. And that's a very different place than out in Hollywood. So I wrote a script and showed it around, and it was a script called An American Girl. It was about a young girl who dies, and she's in college, and she dies of an overdose of drugs. Some years later, I was still itching, and at this point I had done all sorts of things. I had just finished doing a 007 series of commercials for Colgate-Palmolive that I had spent a couple of $1 million in production values shooting. And I said to somebody gee, I could have made a feature with the money I've spent for 3 60-second spots and 3 30-second spots. Finally, I was sitting in the Russian tea room with a friend of mine, and I said, I should make a movie. And he said, it's time. I've been waiting to hear that from you. I'll put up $100,000. You get the rest of the money and go make your movie. We've all been waiting to see if you would do it. So stunned, I thought, my God, I've got $100,000. This is insane. And then I realized that when I wrote American Girl, it was years earlier. And Panic in Needle Park, Man with a Golden Arm, all sorts of films had come out about drug overdoses and this and that and the other. So I tried to buy a script. And one guy gave me a script one day and said, here, Jim, try this. And I read it, and I called him, and I said, you son of a... I said, it doesn't belong in my wastebasket, never mind yours. Why would you give me something like that? And he said to me, and this is one of the top agencies in New York, he said, you're never going to get a script that's any good out of us. Don't you understand? And he said, if you tell anybody I said this, I'll say you're a liar, but you're never going to get a script anywhere in New York. If it's any good at all, it's going to Hollywood. So forget it. So I sat down and wrote The Gardener.
I knew Joe Dallesandro was working with Andy Warhol before I signed on, and I never had seen Flesh or any of his films, but the mere fact that he was working with Warhol interested me. And in all honesty, I didn't know what sort of an actor he was or what he would bring to the part.
Joe Dallesandro was an interesting idea for The Gardener. At that point, he was very hot and heavy with Andy Warhol, and he was coming out of Trash and Flesh and things like that. And he had a rather large following around the world. And I thought he would be an interesting choice. I invited him to audition. He came and had lunch with me and really wanted to do the film. I think Joe was trying to expand at the time, and grow a little away from Andy. So he seemed a very good choice. So that's how we got Joe.
Paul wanted to see me do something with the Hollywood scene, but he wanted to see me do something that that basically I wouldn't fail at, something that would be easy enough for me to do, that he believed that I could do, and pull it off. And so when he had read the script, he thought it would be, you know, something that I could get away with, because I don't know if he believed that I don't think at that period when we were together, he believed that I could do a script. And so his attitude was, if it was real simple, I probably could get away with it. You know? And I don't think I had very much dialogue in the film, especially when I was a tree.
After Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I was offered a lot of parts that were scripts that were like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And I very much wanted to do something different. And there were a couple of projects floating about that were very interesting, but didn't materialize. One of the best ones, as far as I was concerned, was a film about Bleak House, based on Charles Dickens' novel Bleak House. And it looked as though that was going to be a go. But then it didn't work out, and this independent film came along. And when I read the script, I found it a very interesting subject matter because of its classical allusions. So I met with the director, and I liked him very much, and that's how it started.
Alina will be Venus.
What's wrong with that? Nobody said she was 19. The way I understand it, she was a woman of some experience.
And Katherine was interested and willing, and Rita kind of wept her way into it. When I asked her to audition, it was very clear when she came in that she was willing to come in and audition, but she didn't like it, and tears silently rolled down her cheeks all the time she was talking to me, because she had to come in and audition. And it was kind of fun. But Rita was a dramatic person anyway, and we had all great fun together. The Persephone image for Ellen is part of the story of the film, in the sense that it's all dreams. Obviously, Ellen has dreams about the gardener. Obviously, the gardener has dreams about her. The whole thing, quote Edgar Allan Poe, is all that we see or seem, even a dream within a dream.
One of the things that I like most about Jim's script is that it did have a classical theme, which was the abduction of Persephone, who was the Greek goddess of spring. And the story goes that Hades, or the god of the underworld, captures her and takes her into Hades for 6 months out of every year, and that's winter. And then he returns her to her mother, Demeter, for the other 6 months of the year. And I think that all of the Greek myths have wonderful symbolic meanings, however you want to interpret them. And I liked the fact that he was attempting to make that myth contemporary.
John was supposed to be the king of the dead, and she was Persephone, who was kidnapped and taken down to his kingdom. Yes.
I think that what surprised me ultimately was the emphasis on the sexuality in the film, which in a way took away from some of the psychological depth that he had in the script. I always felt that the script was a lot more interesting than the film was, because he is a very educated man, and he had much more complexity, much more psychological complexity in the actual script.
the only mistake I made, or the major mistake I made, was I became, as the fledgling director, I became the money man. And no artist should ever do that. And I stopped thinking creatively, and I started thinking, I've got to save the money. These people have invested and trusted me, and I became the money man. I was not going to overshoot. I was not going to go over budget. I was determined that I was going to bring it in on budget and on time. And it was the wrong way for me as a creative person to attack the film.
Well, of course, one's always taking a chance with a director the first time, but I liked Jim as a person, and I liked what he was trying to do with the script. And although the story didn't turn out on film the way it read on the page, which was a disappointment to me, I've always felt that he was very well intentioned.
And the damages that the film has, the things that I don't like about it, are caused by that, caused by the fact that I didn't have anybody experienced enough to watch me work and say to me, now stop, take a breath, think again, and look at what you're doing and see if you want to make any changes. And I did what I did, and I have to stand by it, and I'm not displeased with it. But it is not a way to be creative about a film, and it was silly in my part to do that. But that's what we do. We make those mistakes, and that was my big mistake.
The character that Joe plays is really a kind of otherworldly character. And again, in the script, that was much clearer, that he was an otherworldly character. And as such, he has power through the flowers to manipulate people's minds. Now, I think that in this film, the weaknesses of the ladies around him are very apparent. Their silliness and their vanity, and the fact that they don't have anything important to do. So in that sense, his power shows up, the vacuousness of their lives.
God, what a luncheon. Someone ought to tell Harriet, no matter how much you overdecorate your table, the food has to be edible.
Oh, it wasn't that bad. I like the dessert.
She's a little stingy on that, too. Well, what are you going to be?
I don't know. I have to think about it.
Gods of mythology. It's a fun idea.
I think it's kind of ironic. It'll be interesting to see what gods people choose to be.
Well, I know a couple of very good candidates for Bacchus.
What didn't get exploited was his relationship with my character. In an obvious film, you would assume that he was going to seduce me and that I was going to become sexually involved with him in some way. And this doesn't happen. As somebody said recently, the film is very chaste in that respect.
As part of a blue-nosed New Englander, that I wasn't going to make a trashy film, and I was thinking of rating, but also Joe wanted to get away from his image as the naked guy on film. And Joe very much was trying to stay away from having to take all his clothes off. He wanted to prove that he was an actor and not necessarily just a side of beef. So I guess it was just also maybe partly my Jesuit background at that time. I did it that way.
I don't think it matters whether the star of a film is a beautiful man or a beautiful woman. They can both be exploited. And Joe doesn't remember this, but we had some serious talks about whether he was comfortable in being exploited, because I firmly felt that if he didn't feel comfortable, that he should just say he didn't want to do a certain scene.
Katherine had brought up, she had thought I was in a lot of fear about doing this nude scene, but I don't believe it. They had always, I think Jim had talked to me about how he wanted to do it, and I believe he always had said to me he wanted to do it from the back, just me entering the pool, and after I was in the water, I would turn to the camera and that would be it, because I think the scene called for Katherine to be glimpsing behind a plant or something at me, or from a window, I can't remember. I think it was behind a plant, watching me as I went into the pool.
I don't think the film, today I probably would have shot it much more hotly and much more dramatically in those scenes, but I think you understand what's happening. I think that you see that Katherine's attraction to him is sexual, although she's trying not to see it that way.
I think that in the script, the influence of him on her, let's say the point is that he is going to take her away into his realm, whether his realm is death or whatever, if she is to become his princess of the dark land. I didn't ever feel that that theme was exploited enough. It got sidetracked. And it got sidetracked, I felt, into an exploration which involved the homoerotic. I think in looking back on it that there must have been a conflict amongst the people who were making decisions about what this film was supposed to be about. And I think that some people probably wanted to tell a story, and other people were more interested in exploiting Joe's sexuality. And I think that in a careful watching of the film, you'll see that there are these two elements going on at the same time, and neither one really resolves. If it were a sexploitation film, it doesn't really come off successfully as that. And if it is a film that's an allegory about the effect of the supernatural on the natural world, that doesn't really quite come off either.
We figured it would be cheaper shooting in Puerto Rico, and the weather would be more conducive to what we were shooting and what the story was. It was, after all, a story about a sort of a South American or Puerto Rican household and the tropics, essentially, and Puerto Rico seemed a good place to go. They welcomed us, and we had a wonderful time down there. We were even guests of the Hunt Club at Puerto Rico. They gave a ball for us.
Initially, we were going to film the film in Haiti, but they were having the beginnings of a revolution. So we shot the film instead in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yes, that's true. That was my, no, actually, no, I had been to Mexico, and when I was 16, 15 years old, I had gone off to Mexico to live, because I was a big criminal, and I had gone there to be a dishwasher. Yep, much more comfortable, and I had money in my pocket. It was kind of nice, and I had the biggest thing I learned, my biggest lesson down there with making that film was that I had a gambling addiction, and I played when I was down there at the casino and lost a little bit of money, enough to make me realize that my addiction could take me to bad places, and I never played again.
I have to say that in my days off, driving around Puerto Rico, my boyfriend came to visit. I found it very depressing, the difference between, the big difference between the rich and the poor. And in some ways, it mirrored what the film was about. I think any society where the division between the rich and the poor is so great is in jeopardy. And it made me nervous, all the big houses with their gates and their guard dogs.
We had rented a sort of an estate, a 5-acre estate in Puerto Rico with swimming pool and all of that, and guard dogs. And we were going through the house and discovered that in every room of the house, there was a panel in the wall, and you'd tap the panel and it would open, and there was a loaded gun in every room of that house. And thinking a film crew is going to come in here and live, and we're going to shoot a movie in this place for 2 months. No, we have to get rid of the guns. And I had to call the owner of the house and say, I'm sending you all your guns with a bonded messenger. And he said to me, no, 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 Jim, you don't understand. You need them. You need them here to protect. And I said, not on a film set. We don't need guns. I'm afraid somebody will kill somebody with them if we have them.
I found it much more interesting to work in the independent film environment because it didn't seem to be so laden with organization and all of the elements in a big studio, publicity and all of the pressures of that would go on in a big studio like Columbia. It was more fun, really.
This was a big thing. It frightened me when the first day of it, and then after I saw that it was exactly like we did but bigger, I got over the fear and just went right ahead with it, and pretty much was in a good state the whole film.
A house was rented to be my house, and most of the film was filmed in that house or on the grounds. So we would do hair and makeup at that house and then proceed from there.
There were a lot of people pestering over me, making sure that my wardrobe was right. I never had that when we did the Warhol films. You know, we didn't have a wardrobe. Whatever you wore to shoot that day, and we didn't have a sound man. Paul did the sound. He did the camera. He did the directing. He did the if the camera was far away, I would hold the mic, or my brother would hold the mic while we did the scene, and we would turn it from one person to the next, pointed at one another to pick up the sound. And that was why most of the time when you watch our films, you can't hear anything what people are saying, and it's real hard to understand the film.
No, I would not say that the experience was a relaxed experience. There were a lot of pressures. Probably the worst pressure were the coquilles, the little tree frogs that proliferate all over Puerto Rico. And they gave us a terrible time because much like a theater that has lots of air conditionings and buzzes of all kinds, there the frogs just all the time were going, and I think when you see the film, you will hear the coquilles. You cannot not hear the coquilles. They were just devils, and the sound man was going absolutely crazy.
Max, what are you telling these ladies out here that's keeping them so spellbound?
Oh, Max was just making a suggestion for Ellen's costume for the ball.
Well, Ellen, did he solve your problem?
Well, I'm not sure.
But in shooting, in night shootings, aside from the frogs, the tree frogs that kept chirping like mad, you would sometimes hear the dogs. And if it weren't your dogs that were out of the kennels, it could be the neighbors' dogs that were out of the kennels and patrolling about. So it was an interesting neighborhood to work in.
They took care of us very well, as I recall. Life was very simple. One didn't need to have a lot of attention paid.
So it was a completely different thing to have a room that you rested in between shots. There wasn't between shots with us. It was, if the camera ran out of film, we'd take off the magazine and put new film in it, and we continue to shoot. That didn't take more than 5 minutes to do that, and we were back to working again.
Rita was just very dramatic. Before we even went on location, before we went on location and went down to shoot in Puerto Rico, after we had set the cast, Rita would call my office in New York and she would be sobbing, and I'd pick up the phone and there would Rita be, and I'd say, Rita, what's wrong? And I would get all upset. I'd call her agent right away, and the agent would say, don't worry, Rita cries a lot from time to time. And it was, I guess, a sort of an attention thing, because I know Rita, and I know she is very capable and not at all flaky or fly-by-night, but she loved her a little bit of drama now and then.
What if he hasn't done anything and I'm being unfair?
He'll have a good job at my place. I can handle him.
I suppose that I remember about the film most Rita Gam, because most of our scenes were together and we spent a lot of time when we weren't shooting together, going to supper or going to the beach or whatever, and we had a great deal of fun and became very good friends. She's a charming woman, very bright, and full of wonderful stories about the business, wonderful stories about all the things that she's done. And we stayed in the same hotel, and so it just made that friendship very easy.
That was somewhat problematical from time to time. Katherine, of course, her aunt was Katharine Hepburn, and Katherine saw herself as the perfect trooper, and very much like Auntie, who was always together. So Katherine knew all her lines right away. Katherine was prepared from take one. Rita, who came from a slightly more, shall we say, colorful background and all, kind of did not always know her lines right away. Rita kind of eased into them, so that by the time Rita was ready to do a good take, Katherine was going stale, which made it difficult for me as the director to keep the balance going there. But other than that, they were fine together, and ladies both.
I think so. I don't think anybody hated me. It's a long time ago. Maybe, maybe all just thought I was, an idiot, but I don't think so. I think we all got along real well.
There was no conflict between me and Joe at all. We liked each other. In my memory of it anyway, maybe he would have something different to say, but I liked him immensely as soon as we met. I found him very sympathetic. Of course, he's beautiful looking, but he just seemed to be a very good-hearted person and very serious about his work and dedicated to doing what we were all trying to do, to tell this story. And I like that in people. Whatever their background is, whatever experience they've had. I wasn't very experienced either, you have to remember at that point. I'd done more theater than I had done film.
Oh, it made it quite different because this was the first time I showed up on a set where I wasn't involved with a bunch of freaks, But I never judged anybody that I worked with. I just was real happy that, that I was able to do what people needed me to do, and they appreciated it. It was the basic way. I suited up, showed up to work, and I did whatever you asked me to do and hoped it was good enough.
In the end, all we did was use the footage, shoot the footage, do stop motion in a sense, keep adding bark to Joe's face and things like that, and blending him into the tree by dissolves.
Well, I think that was the hardest part of the film, shooting the ending, changing into a tree, because there was a lot of makeup, and the special effects back then were not the way we have them today, so things were a lot harder. There was a long time gluing things to me and pasting things on me, and in the end they did do some tricks with the film. can't remember exactly how they superimposed some stuff over the original shot.
That's essentially the effect. We could have done such a, today it would be so much more spectacular, but we didn't then. And beside that, effects are expensive.
When they first sent me the tape, I wanted to look at the scene that was the most important to me, and that was changing into a tree. So I fast-forwarded right through the whole film to that part, and watched it 2 or 3 times, and thought, wow, that looks pretty good. They were right. It would have been, you know, it was going to look a lot different than what it looked like on that night that we were shooting it.
It's absolutely impossible for me to rate or tell you how I feel about the film. It was a very important milepost in my life. It was an education. It was a whole lifetime of education, and I regret not one single minute of it.
I think it's amazing and quite wonderful that anybody is interested in seeing this film now, and that it has any contribution to film history in any way, shape, or manner is terrific. I'm delighted.
Revivifying the film after all these years creates all sorts of sensations in me. I think it's terrific. If anybody gets more joy out of it, or it works for anybody, or it amuses anybody, I think that's great.
I'm told by some people that they've read in the press that making The Gardener was the end of my film career. That it was such a departure from the sort of thing that I had done with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that it ruined my chances of ever working again in Hollywood. Now, I'm the last person in the world to know about whether something like that is true, but all I can say is I don't have any regrets about doing it. It was the first challenging script that came along after Guess Who's Coming to Dinner that wasn't just a script that was a rehash of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and I certainly didn't want to do that because you don't want to walk down the same path again and again and again.
Did anybody ever mention the credit of The Gardener when giving me a job? I don't believe anybody ever mentioned ever seeing me in much of anything. They all say, oh, I've seen lots of your films, but I don't think they ever specifically mentioned any film that I've ever done as, oh, I really liked you in that, when they were giving me a job.
I think that making Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was both a fantastically wonderful experience, terrific opportunity, but that was the end of my film career, because the character that I played was a cipher. She wasn't really a character that you could get a hold of and say, oh, I know who this actress is and what she could do because of what she does in this film.
I would always talk to them as if, you know, if you believe I can do your film, you know, I can do it. Because I always come from a place of, you know, I'm really fooling you all. I'm not really an actor. But if you believe I can do something, you know, if you believe I can do it, I'll do it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 or so years.
I wish it had turned Katherine Houghton into a major star, but it didn't. And I wish it had made Joe even bigger than he was in terms of filmdom, but I don't think it did. I don't think it hurt anybody, and that's also important.